Hello, and welcome to the PMC SMACCA webinar and live presentation giving an overview of the current status of the Milwaukee United Building Trades Pension Trust Fund. I'm your host, Lori Rawlings from PMC SMACCA, and our presenter today is Mike Gantert, who is the administrator of the Pension Trust Fund. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Great. Yeah, welcome. So I'm just going to turn it over to you to give us an overview of the pension fund and an update and answer any questions that people might have.
Excellent. I just want to start out with bringing you up to date on where it was. We just got our consultant report as of March 31st on the asset allocation. And it shows that the fund's assets as of March 31st were $2,037,408,126. We broke the $2 billion mark in early January, and so far things are holding up. And a question that always comes up, of course, is what's the breakdown? How do you invest the money? And so just to give you the breakdown as of March 31st, overall, in domestic equity, we have 50.42% of our assets invested in domestic equity. And that is broken down by 25.56% in value equity and 24.86% in growth equity. Normally, our projection is that we're 50-50, but certainly as the market changes, you'll find more value in growth sometimes when there's a positive, and then when people are skeptical, they go more to value for the dividends. So that always changes, but we're pretty even right now because growth is starting to pick up because there's more positive activity. And then we also have 10.2% in international equity, and then the rest is between fixed income, which is 27.15, and real estate, which is 9.97, and then, of course, the rest is in cash. So that's a breakdown of where we are currently. Now, before I get to the second slide, here's what's happening with the fund, right? Some of the reports will certainly show that. When the actuary did the study to determine our funding percentage a little over a year ago, we were at about 75% funding level. That required that the plan, and they did.
Why was that? Why were they required to adopt a funding improvement plan?
Because the Pension Plan Act of 2006 requires that if you are below 80% funding, which is defined as green zone, which I will explain a little more detail.
Okay.
Back in 2006, the zones were green zone 80% or more, yellow zone 65 to 80, and below 65 you were red zone. If you were yellow zone, that required a funding improvement plan. If you were 65 or lower, that was a rehabilitation plan. Okay. So because our funding percentage was below 80%, we had to adopt a funding improvement plan, which we did. So effective June 1 of 2016, in order to meet our requirements to get us back into green zone within a 10-year period of time, it was required that the fund put in $1 as of June 1, 2016, which they did, and 75 cents as of 2017, and 25 cents as of 2018. As I've said in the past, we adopted a 3-year funding improvement plan, but in reality, there is no 3-year plan. Every year, the actuary has to do a funding projection to determine what is required on a year-to-year basis. Now, the reason that we had to put that money in, there are 3 factors that went into requiring the money. Number one, last June 1st, we had a 0 rate of return. Our
Wow,
assumption is 7.5.
that's quite a difference.
So we took a loss. Even though we didn't lose any money from our assets, okay, they remain. We have a 7.5% interest rate. There are two other factors that contributed to that $1.75 and 25. One was a mortality study
Okay.
that we did in 2015. That, lo and behold, showed that people, on average, are living a year longer. Life expectancy now for the building trades is 83.
Wow.
It was 82, but on average, people are living 83. And because we guarantee benefits for a lifetime, we have to fund that. So when you look at, okay, so what can that mean, cost-wise? Well, when you pay out right now about $160 million a year, we just added a liability of $160 million. Fortunately, we get to fund that over a 15-year period of time. It's even a bigger blow because the Pension Plan Act of 2016 changed our amortization period. Amortization is nothing more than a fancy word for mortgage. We used to be able to fund those costs over 25 years. We now have to fund it over 15 years. So that puts quite a financial burden on the plan. Then the next year, the actuary did another study, and that was average retirement age. Right now, and if you go to slide 2, you will see a breakdown, but I will tell you that currently life expectancy was about 60. It varies by trades, as you can see. When the actuary did the study, it showed that on average, people were retiring at about 57.
Okay. Yeah, that could be a fairly significant difference in benefits over a lifetime.
Absolutely. And he used a 5-year study to do this, going back to 2011. What I said in behalf of the committee was, whoa, wait a minute. 3 of those 5 years, there was a lack of work out there. I mean, our actives dropped from 15,000 to 11,000, right? And I was getting calls from people saying, Mike, I don't want to retire, but I lost my bank of hours and I'm not working. And, fortunately, they were of retirement age and could retire. So they were retiring, right? So the numbers were skewed. It's not that they wanted to, per se. It's that they had to. So the actuary agreed to take a reasonable approach, and he did the propose. Okay, we split the 3-year to a 1.5 years.
Okay. So initially, what the actuary was saying is people are retiring a lot younger than the 60 years, and they're also living a lot longer, so you need to fund the benefits at a much higher level than you were funding them before. Is that basically how it breaks down? Okay.
Now, the fact that people are retiring earlier, as I pointed out in the past, normal retirement is 63 in this plan, and early is 55. Right? Just like Social Security, when you retire early, you're getting the benefits over an extended period of time. It's still the same bucket of money, you're just getting it over a longer period of time. We call that bucket of money the present value of benefits.
Okay.
Of what that present value would be when you retire early, and that's based on here's how much you're going to get over your projected lifetime, which is till age 83. So 20 years from 63 to. If you start taking it at 55, you're getting that same bucket of money over a longer period of time. As Social Security, if you retire at 62, they're going to reduce that benefit by 6% a year for every year up to your normal retirement. Same thing for a plan. That's the same thing. However, because of the building trades, both management and labor agreed that these are the trades. People's body get beat up. Okay? You have to make sure they have the choice of retiring. So through the years, they reduced that 6% until 1997 when they went from 3% to 1%.
So essentially, people who retire early under the building trades plan are being subsidized in a way that they wouldn't be subsidized under Social Security, for example.
Correct. And to use the correct term, they are substantially being subsidized.
Oh, okay.
Because the cost is 6%. If you're getting 1% a year, if you retire the first of the month following your 55th birthday, we're only going to reduce your benefit by 8%, when the actual cost reduction is 48%. So the plan is subsidizing 40% of that benefit. So the fact that people were retiring earlier puts a tremendous burden on the plan.
Okay.
Because of the subsidies. So then that added to and helped to drop the funding level down below the 80%.
Okay.
So you had that factor, you had the mortality factor, you had the fact that we had a 0% return in the 1 year.
Okay.
All right. All puts a burden on the plan on a liability standpoint. With that in mind, the trustees said, we have to do something because putting money in the plan, okay, isn't solving the problem. The plan has put money in since 2004 with no benefit increases. But yet our funding percentage is still down to 75. Now the strange thing is that when the government came out with the Multi-Employer Pension Reform Act, they said they made a change to the funding levels. Green, yellow, and red stayed the same. However, they now come out and said, if your actuary says that your funding improvement plan will get you back into the green zone within a 10-year period of time, you can be certified to be green. So I send out the funding notices this year saying we are certified to be green zone.
Even though you're not at least 80%
even though we're a
funded.
75% funded plan.
Interesting.
All right. Well, you follow the government regulations, but to me, that's very confusing because we're still only 75% funded,
And
we're certified to be green.
And I'm sorry, based on your current funding improvement plan, when do you project you're going to reach at least 80% funding?
I will get to that in a more detailed report as soon as I finish up on that.
Sorry for skipping ahead, Mike.
No, not a problem. So the trustees realizing that putting money in isn't getting us to where we have to be. They then did some plan changes. And they went at the thing that cost the plan the most, okay? The subsidized benefit for the early retirement reduction.
Okay.
So a newsletter went out the second quarter of 2016 that says, okay, effective June 1 of 2016, we are increasing the early retirement reduction factors.
Okay.
Age 55, it's 4% a year.
Thanks for joining us, Bob. It's okay. We're recording, so that's why I wasn't more excited to see you.
Age 56, 3%. So if somebody retires at age 55, it's 4% a year times 8 years would be 32%. Okay? 56, 3%. 57, 2% a year. 58 to 62, it stays at 1%. And that's all outlined on page 3. That's for early retirement, or on attachment 3. That's for early retirement and also applies to disability, with then the maximum reduction being 32% on disability.
So there's a disability benefit in this fund also.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just a defined benefit.
No. So, but you're not going to see a tremendous savings from this yet. because this is only for hours worked commencing June 1 of 2016. So a guy retiring this year, okay, with 25 years of service, 24 years if he retires at 55 are at 1%. Only the last year is the 4% reduction. So it isn't going to have a tremendous impact. It's going to take a while for us to see the actual savings of that because the majority of ours are still at the 1%. Okay? So at 55, that's still an 8% reduction, and the plan's still subsidizing 40%.
Why did we do it that way, Mike?
Because that's what labor and management finally came to an agreement on.
Okay.
We did get costs on what the cost savings would be if we did it for past and future service. Because this is an ancillary benefit, by ancillary, okay, if this plan ever went insolvent, the only benefit that the PBGC guarantees is normal retirement. There is no such thing as early or disability, or so those are what we call ancillary. You can't take away a regular benefit. Ancillary benefits you can't go back on. Okay. But labor felt that that would be too much of a push and too hard to sell to their members. So they came to an agreement that, okay, let's take this. We're not in a, in red zone. So let's be more conservative and take this approach. They also said that they are willing to look at it going forward to see if more additional increases in the early retirement reduction are needed. So that went into effect, and once again, it won't have a big impact right away. It's going to take quite a few years for those hours to accumulate to where you're going to see, okay, that reduction. And we're still adding a subsidy to the plan because, as I said earlier, it's a 6% a year reduction. So 4%, okay, we're still going to subsidize the plan 2% a year. The one thing they added that labor asked for and management agreed was that they wanted to reward people who truly make a living in the trade. As we had talked about, a lot of times you'll get guys who work non-union until they realize the value of benefits. And all of a sudden they come and they join the unions. Right? They wanted to reward the guys that start out right away going into the trade. So if you have 30 or more years at the time you retire, the 1% stays into effect regardless. Now, that's not going to have a big impact on the plan because I do a report based on what the actuary actually does a study that gives a breakdown of years of service. And I go and I put a report together. And on average, for all of the trades, you're approximately 6% of your members have more than 30 years. So you don't have a lot of people there, but they want to reward those. If you start out at a young age working at the trades, we want to help you out.
Mike, but that's the current stat? Does that include the predicted future stat?
Pretty much so. It's been, that 6% has been pretty consistent throughout for all the years I've been doing this.
So 5 years from now, 6% still the number is my question.
Yeah, I would say. And if it did vary, 1% or 2%, you're not going to see a big jump. And the reason is it's the construction trade. I mean, guys' bodies get beat up. Plus the fact their benefits are high enough, it's to their advantage to go do something else, and get their pension. And on the other side, employers certainly want the guy with the good background. But let's face it, with the wage package costs, you want the young guy that can run up and down the ladder, not baby step it. But you do want some experience out there. But you don't want a whole crew of 50-year-old guys. You want the younger guys that, can bounce around a little bit faster and move a little bit faster. So that's the thinking why they did the 30. Now also, Okay? They loaded this up front with the increase in percentages. Because as we all know, there's a lot of work out there. And the question is, do we have enough skilled labor to do the job? They're trying to give an incentive to guys who are 55 to 58. Stick around until you're 58, and then the reduction stays at 1%.
Okay.
So it's sort of loaded for different things, okay? To give an incentive for that guy 55 who's still capable to stick around for a few more years. And then it's at 1%, you didn't lose anything. And then 30-year also to reward that guy. So those changes were put into effect. Right. Then, if you go to slide 4, that's just a recap of where we were at the year end. That shows a 74.9. I said 75.1. When the actuary does his certification to the government, he has to do that within 60 days of the plan year end. So he had to do this as of August, all right? Well, we don't have our audited financial statements done until December. So there are always adjustments. The actuary is doing his best guess assumption when he certifies. And normally when I went back and did a study, normally you're only a point or two off between the certification one and the actual one, you know. So that's why I chose the 74.9, you know, based on market. And it gives you a breakdown of what the present value of vested benefits are, which shows $2,558,000,000 versus the present value of accrued benefits of $2,772,000,000. And let me explain what those two are, okay? Simply put, the total value of vested benefits are the people that have 5 more years and are vested. They're locked in, okay? If the plan were to stop tomorrow, federal regulations say everybody's vested, whether you have 1 year or not. So accrued benefits are the total liability out there, including people who don't have 5 years to date. The guy who just started out only has 2. So that's always going to be higher. So that's just the numbers on that. But now, the thing I want to get to is what I said earlier. When you go to slide 5.
Mike, before you move to slide
Sure.
5, just a question on slide 4. Under assets and ratio of assets to vested benefits, there are 2 different values, actuarial value and market value.
Yes.
Can you explain the difference between those two?
Market value is reality,
Okay.
all right? But from an actuarial standpoint, we don't like to follow the market. Because as I said, all right, over the last 3 years, we were a 15% return, we were an 8% return, then we're a 0% return. All right? We'd be adjusting benefits at the, you know, well, anybody that follows the market, it's a, so what plans do in order to stabilize that is they do a 5-year smoothing.
Okay.
They take the past 5 years average to smooth out those ups and downs. That is the simplification for defining actuarial. It's based on 5-year smoothing of the asset.
Okay, thank you. So on to slide 5 then, huh?
So that was everything as of the plan year end, and our plan year is at June 1 through May 31. So a lot of the figures I gave you were as of May 31 of 2016. Okay. Now the actuary has to, and the trustees have to have a game plan in place to determine if their funding improvement plan that I stated earlier is sufficient. Because as I said, there is no 3-year plan. Every year we have to look at that. Well, we can't wait until the end of the year to do that because we have to adopt changes as of the June 1 plan year. So our actuary is asked to do a funding projection based on best guess. And that's what slide 5 is. All right. Now, the hours worked was projected to be 13.2. But we already know that at that point we were at 14.1 back in February. We're going to exceed that. We're going to probably hit 15 million hours. So we are well above our actuarial projection. That's one projection. The other one is total contributions. We know we're going to hit the 160 million. We may even come a little bit ahead. So we will also have a gain there. As of February, we were projected to meet our 7.5% return. As a matter of fact, the numbers we got through March, we are at an 8.7% return projected so far. Now, we still have 2 months to go, April and May.
Sure.
And May is always a difficult month, so there's no guarantee we're going to remain at that 8.7. Hopefully, we will, even if we have a flat market going out and we keep the 8.7, because then we will have a gain there also. All right. So those are the big factors when you talk about interest rate, contributions, and hours worked. Those are three factors that go into funding the plan. So if all of that holds true, then we are in good shape. As a matter of fact, the actuary, when he did the projections and said, we meet all of those, the plan would have only needed 25 cents. Why did the trustees pick the 75 cents? Because when you look at this graph, there are two scenarios on the bottom. There's the funding percentage, which I've talked about. Okay, and under this plan, we'd be back up to 80% funded at 2022. And trust me, the majority of people say 80% funding isn't a good level. Everybody would rather be at 100% funding. Okay. But then there's another one, credit balance. It's one that personally I don't agree with, but let me explain what funding balance is. I'm sorry, credit balance. Credit balance is nothing more than your checking account. Right? You get a check every month and you pay your bills. Lo and behold, your vehicle breaks down and you got to go out and get a new transmission. You probably don't have that in your check, but you have a savings account, right, for emergencies. So you pull money out of your savings account. Well, we have $2 billion of a savings account, all right? But the credit balance is cash flow. And when work was down, our cash flow went from well over $100 million down to the current 27. It was actually lower than that. It was down to about 13. We need to fund that credit balance with excess cash, because a negative credit balance that's projected within a 3-year period of time will put you into red zone. Forget yellow, red zone. And then you have to do some major changes. So we want to avoid that. Both labor and management want to avoid that, because that would force changes in benefits. But here's the other thing. It also imposes a surcharge of 5% the first year and 10% every year thereafter, over and above the contributions that you've negotiated. Forget about what you negotiated. The government's going to add that surcharge on top of that. So both sides certainly don't want to get to that level. So the fact that we may not need the 75 cents and it may only be 25 cents based on what the projections were in February, that would help to then increase that credit balance. We want to get that off the books as a consideration. We just want to deal with funding percentage.
I'm sorry, Mike. What is sort of a healthy credit balance for a fund this size?
Oh, I'm saying at least 100 million. I mean, when you look at the fact that we pay out 160 million in benefits alone.
Sure.
And then we have another 4.5 million in expenses. Yeah, you want a cushion there.
Okay.
So is that the annual positive cash flow of the fund, or is that the actual cash on hand for the fund?
This is the actual cash on that credit balance.
Yeah.
Is the actual cash on hand.
Okay.
So when you're paying out $160 million a year, that's not much of a a stopgap.
So we had 29 million of cash on March 31st from the first page, and that equates to the projection here of 27 million of cash on hand. All right, I just want to be sure I can connect the dots.
Yeah,
correctly.
it's going to be close because things happen.
No, I get it.
And
this is a forecast, and I get that.
I get quite a bit of a question, questions when people look and say, well, how come administrative costs are going up so much? You must be living the good life. Yeah, well, bottom line, there are things that are out of our control, all right? And like I say, trustees can only react to what's happening. They don't control the market. They don't control the industry as far as, jobs. When banks went south and it was hard to get a line of credit, okay, there weren't many jobs going on because the money wasn't there to do it, all right? And the other thing that I point out to the trustees and to people is, and the one thing we don't control is the government. I mentioned earlier that they lowered our amortization schedule from 25 to 15 years. And the example I use is, think of what you would have had to do when you bought a house and you had a 30-year mortgage and you were told, oh, no, that has to be a 15. You wouldn't have the house. Okay. And we didn't have a choice. That was any expense incurred after 2006, you're funding that over 15 years. The other thing is, okay, we pay a premium to the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. That was established in 1974 to finance plans that went insolvent. And there's a ton of plans that are projected to go insolvent. When that first started, we paid a premium of $2.30 per participant. Last year, $27. We pay the government, PBGC, over $700,000 a year in premiums to guarantee a plan if it goes insolvent. And they're constantly passing laws to make sure we don't go insolvent. And one of those laws was under the Pension Reform Act that now allows trustees to reduce retiree benefits. We could never do that before. If we're projected to be insolvent within 10 years, we can apply to the U.S. Treasury for the ability to reduce retiree benefits to try and salvage the plan so that PBGC doesn't have to pay them.
But that would have to be approved by both labor and management trustees, correct? The idea of reducing benefits?
It goes beyond that. Not only would the trustees have to approve it, U.S. Treasury has to approve it. And if you've been following the Teamsters Central States that is projected to be insolvent, they applied to the U.S. Treasury, and the U.S. Treasury denied the request. And they've also said to a couple, no, we're not going to because your plan's too far gone. We'd be wasting our time by doing it. They finally, one plan has now been approved, and that is the iron workers out of Cleveland. They applied to the U.S. Treasury. U.S. Treasury has approved it, and their membership voted it 2-1. So they will be able to reduce retiree benefits. That's the first one on the books so far. But there's about 20 plans out there that are headed in that direction. So then when you look at that, we're battling two things. The funding percentage and the credit balance. And of course, management ideal situation is, let's get this plan 100% funded. You see an awful lot of work about, not work, but an awful lot about alternative plans. There's a big push out there because of this now. And alternative plans set a whole different range rather than this 100%, 80%. Okay? Those plans are set up to give the two biggest guarantees that both sides want. Number one, no liability in the plan. And number two, that benefits can be guaranteed for a lifetime. So these alternative plans, okay, freeze the current plan Use part of the assets to start to fund off that unfunded over a 15-year period of time. Use the additional money to set up a plan that requires anywhere from 110 to 120% maintained funding level. If you're above it, you can add a benefit. If you're below it, you decrease the benefit. You do it on a yearly basis to guarantee the plans will not get into this level. So you react immediately. And some state plans are going that way. You're seeing it more and more. Some of the other plans are called to an alternative plan. It's difficult because, for instance, in this plan, when you've got unfunded liability of $700 million, that's going to take quite a hunk out of the current contribution. So there's going to have to be a sacrifice on the accrual rate going forward in order to pull some of that money out to fund that liability to get it to that, goal.
What's the annual funding amount? How much do we fund in a year?
When you say fund,
you said fund. So the unfunded liability is $700 million. What's the annual funding amount that we fund every year?
Well,
how much
you have contributions of $160 million.
Okay, $160 million.
Yeah. Okay. And I can't remember what it was, but we had the actuary do a study of how much of the contribution, I think it was in the $4 to $5 range, would be needed to fund the unfunded, and then the balance would be could be used for a benefit. But labor isn't willing to go that direction right now. They're trying to fix the plan.
I'm sorry, you're saying if they were to go to an alternative plan design, it would be $4 to $5 an hour contribution rate?
Well, that was the projection that was done a couple years ago. I mean, that depending on where you're at the time that you go to that, you freeze a part of the contribution to take care of that because there's no more benefit accrual in that plan. So it's a locked-in plan. It's a frozen plan.
So effectively, you're fully funding it, right?
Over a period of time. It could be over 15 years.
So the alternative plan design, are you talking, would that take the form of sort of a hybrid plan between a defined benefit and a defined contribution plan, or is there a completely different alternative out there?
It still pretty much stays a defined benefit plan.
Okay.
There's no defined contribution.
Okay.
On the ones I've seen. Now, there are others to where they go from, they freeze the defined benefit, they go more to a defined contribution. But certainly labor hasn't indicated any desire to go in that direction. If there was any consideration, they would freeze that and do a hybrid plan on a defined benefit where you then adjust yearly based on, if you have a good return, you add. If you don't, you react accordingly.
Okay, so the option that had been discussed was to just freeze the existing defined benefit plan in place and then start over with a new defined benefit plan. Okay.
And like I said, it was management asked if a study could be done. It's not that labor was even thinking of doing that, but they agreed, okay, let's see what the cost would be.
Sure.
Okay. So it's okay now that we know, now let's move on.
Okay.
End of discussion. So when you look at this here, then once again, when you look at all these numbers and you go down to the scenario and you look at after return during the year, okay? All of this is based on a 7.5% return every year. The minute you have less, all the numbers change.
Sure.
About the only thing I can say is I'm quite sure that over the next 4 years we will meet the top two, and that's the total hours and the contribution. Because we all know there's a lot of work that's projected here. Right? So these hours, okay, are reasonable based on what it is. The most that I've seen in the years since I've been here, I believe was 2008 when we hit 19 million hours. Why is that? Well, it's a big job going on that everybody loves. Power plant in Mill Creek. That in itself, that job, they projected to generate 19 million hours on its own. Now, that was over a 3 or 4 year working period, and not all the hours came here because We obviously don't have sheet metal workers and operating engineers, but that really jacked our hours up. But, you know, that's not our standard. Our standard is between 15 and 16 million hours. So that's, unless there is no questions
Actually,
on that.
Mike, I do have a question.
good.
I'm sorry. Who decides what assumptions are going to be made for this, for the projection? So, for example, who decides that we're going to use a 7.5% asset return during the year assumption?
Good question. All of the assumptions are established by the fund's actuary. The government holds the fund's actuary responsible for using reasonable assumptions. And every year they look at, for instance, okay, why was a mortality study done? The National Society of Actuaries did a study that showed yes, people are living longer, and the mandate went down to all actuaries to do a study on your group to determine. The 7.5% interest rate assumption. This plan, up until 1980, is 6.5% interest rate assumption.
Oh, really? Okay.
Labor said you're denying us benefits by being that low. They said we want a second opinion. They brought in the Siegel Company to review the assumptions along with our actuary. Based on that, it was determined that 7.5% was more reasonable. So they went to a 7.5% assumption.
So they don't get it in the market.
That automatically put us overfunded because there's a limit on how much money we can have. So then the trustees' only option was to adopt a benefit improvement.
Because the federal law requires that?
Absolutely. You cannot be overfunded. We're not a bank. We can't store money.
Okay.
All these contributions are go to the benefit of participants less reasonable administrative costs. We can't be 200% funded. They're saying, excuse me, that money's sitting there that goes to the participant. And there was a level, I forget what it was, 120%, 140, something at that point. So then with that higher interest rate assumption, okay, we had a surplus. So they gave retiree increases, and they increased retroactive for all service. They increased the benefit accrual.
What year was that, Mike?
1980. Now, of course, the question is 7.5 still a reasonable assumption? Based on all the studies being done, it is, but that's truly a question. The amazing thing when the U.S. Treasury denied the Teamsters, the reasons they gave for denying were multiple, but two of the ones that stood out were that the reductions were not equally distributed between retirees and actives, and the second, which shocked everybody, was, and the 7.5% interest rate assumption they were using, the government felt wasn't reasonable.
And it's my understanding that that iron workers plan that did get approved by the Treasury Department used a much lower, like a 6%.
6 or 6.5, yes.
Return. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's an interesting footnote.
You know, it will see it. That has a tremendous impact on the plan. I mean, if the actuary came in and said, we have to reduce our assumption to 7 or 6.5, oh my God, that could throw us in the red zone. That's scary. I mean, a good example, we used a 8% interest rate assumption on withdrawal liability calculation. We could use a different assumption for that, okay? the actuary came in a couple years ago, 3 now, and said they no longer felt comfortable with an 8%, and were recommending a 7.5%. And as I tell the trustees, understand when the actuary comes in with a recommendation, there is no recommendation. It's a mandate. If he's not comfortable with an assumption, you better change. There's a thing on the 5500, have you changed your actuary recently? And if you mark yes, and the Department of Labor follows up and said, why did you? Oh, well, the actuary wanted us to change this assumption, and we said no. Trust me, the Department of Labor will be in to take issue with us. So there are recommendations, and it's based on studies. When we did the mortality study, okay, it was a study that showed when they did the average retirement age, they did a study of when people were retiring and said, wait a minute, 60 is no longer reasonable. Okay, we're recommending this. And once again, as I tell the trustees, they're being nice with the recommendation. It's a mandate. So we'll see how that plays out. You know, the interesting thing, I go back a long way in doing this, when I first started in the mid-70s, the money that we had coming in that we would send to the bank to invest, we weren't giving to the bank. We were buying CDs because I could get 15% on a 6-month CD. Up until the market crashed, all right, you could get your 7.5% return on fixed income. Equity returns were all gravy. That's where you did your benefit improvements. You could put all your money into fixed, and you were locked in. You could get an annuity contract for 7-8%. Now, good luck. You know?
We're back up to the 8% assumption on the withdrawal liability.
Yeah.
Why do they use a different assumption there?
You could. The government
to
allows you
project
to.
out
The employers push for it. It was kind of like, okay, we'll give you this, but we want an 8% assumption because it lowered the possibility of withdrawal liability.
So
to show you when we went from 7.5 to 8, I think we went from like 350 million in withdrawal liability up to what, close to 500 million. That's quite an impact.
So just to back up another step too, we've been throwing around a couple of different terms that I'm not sure all of our listeners will be familiar with. So one of them is withdrawal liability, and one of them, the other one is the concept of the different zones, green, yellow, red. Mike, could you give us just brief, as you can, definitions of each of those terms?
The zones are based on funding percentage. Okay, what the present value of your benefits are. It's really liabilities versus assets. Okay, so when you have a situation where we can amortize and once again mortgage our costs, it's just like an individual who has a mortgage on their home. Okay, because you have a mortgage, it doesn't mean you're broke. But when you look at your liabilities, you can have a mortgage out there for $80,000 and your assets may not match that, but you're allowed it. Well, same thing here, okay? Plans can do that. So that's why an 80% funding level was determined to be green zone.
Okay.
Because you get the mortgage. And then when it drops below that, well, that's not reasonable, the government said, all right. Personally, I wish they would have said
100%?
100%
is green zone?
Okay? So that's where the zoning comes. Now, withdrawal liability has some history to it. As I said earlier, in 1974, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act that we all refer to as ERISA was established. And in there, it established the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, a government agency that we pay a premium to, that if a plan goes insolvent, the government will take over and guarantee a certain amount of that benefit, all right? So that retirees will have something coming. Well, unfortunately, as benefits went up, that guarantee is very small. It's about $1,100 a month. So, you know, in this plan, if you're getting 3, 4, 5,000, that's a heck of a drop.
Right.
However, from 1974 to 1980, the government realized, holy cow, we've taken on more of a burden than we can handle. So they came out with the Multi-Employer Pension Plan Amendments Act that we call MEPPAA. And in there, they established withdrawal liability. If an employer withdraws from a plan that has unfunded liability, he has to pay up his portion. You can't just walk away from a plan that has liability.
That's even if the employer has been making their contributions on
Correct.
time in full.
It has nothing to do with whether you're current or not, or the plan. Now, that's a complicated law. Okay, there's different ways to determine withdrawal liability. There's full withdrawal, there's partial withdrawal, gets complicated. But to keep it simple, so there's withdrawal liability. All right. What hurt the Teamsters Central States? One thing. All right. There's 5 retirees for every active, and I heard they're paying out $2 billion a year more than what's coming in. Who was the biggest player in that plan? United Parcel. They withdrew from the plan. They were told if you withdraw, it's going to cost you $1 billion. Guess what? They said, here's the check, we're out of the plan. By pulling out, that plan lost so many of the actives because that was the biggest player. Now all of a sudden you've got these retirees who are there, okay, and that's where the 5-to-1 ratio comes in. The one exemption that applies to you is there is a construction industry exemption that says if an employer stops contributing into this plan because he has stopped working, there is no withdrawal liability. What's the logic behind that? All right. There's a statistic that we have to do every year to determine, has there been a 5% contributor in this plan? No, there hasn't been since 2009. The only one was Bechtel.
Bechtel?
Bechtel, I'm sorry, yeah. Because they were the general at the power plant with all those hours. That was the only 5% contributor.
So they only contributed at least 5% of the hours, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, when the power plant was done, Bechtel moved out. They're not contributing anymore. Okay? They didn't get assessed with withdrawal liability. There are contractors that have closed business. Okay? They haven't been assessed with withdrawal liability. It's all about jobs. If there's a job there, okay, and you close your business, trust me, there's another contract that will gladly bid on that job. The only thing that hurts is if you continue to work, whether non-union or whatever, and stop contributing into this plan. One of the things at a conference I asked when they had people from TBGC, I said, so clarify something for me. If the union and the employer agree that these plans are too difficult now, and they agree to bargain into a 401k plan, they're still union. Would they be assessed withdrawal liability? Absolutely. Because you stopped contributing into this plan. But if you close your business and you're done, there is no withdrawal liability. I mean, we've had contractors that have just closed up. They said, I'm done. Okay? There's no withdrawal liability. So that's what the withdrawal liability is for.
But if they sell and the business continues?
Well, then I suggest you consult an attorney to make sure you're doing it right on the sale of assets. You know, because it does get complicated. And you certainly want to make sure that if you're selling your business, you're doing it, okay, to make sure that you don't have any withdrawal liability. There's also a feature there, if you sell the business and the person you sell to is union, and he goes non-union, within 5 years, you're going to be assessed withdrawal liability. The rules get very complicated, and that's why when you reach that point, you should really, discuss it with an attorney.
So that's kind of a nice plug there, Mike, for an upcoming podcast and live seminar we are going to be doing specifically on the topic of withdrawal liability with Mike McNally, who's an attorney from the Fellhaber-Larsen firm, who's an expert in these matters. So watch our newsletter for information about that podcast and the live seminar.
It is, and as I just said here, when that question comes up, I quickly tell people, call an attorney, because it's very complicated. You have generals that have contracts with more than one craft. You may have cement masons and laborers and carpenters. Okay. Well, what happens if you come to a point where you stop your contract with the laborers, but you're still contributing for 2 others? That's partial withdrawal liability. The rules get very complicated. What happens if you're going along and for some reason your hours drop by 70%? Okay, what's going on there? Well, we're going to look at that because that may be partial withdrawal liability. And it gets extremely complicated. So that's why you need to talk to an attorney to make sure you're doing it so that you won't get hit. So that's basically it on withdrawal liability. And once again, it's something that the government put in to protect themselves because they don't have, the PBTC is projected to go bankrupt within 10 years with all of the plans that are protected against themselves. And a lot of that has to do with, unfortunately, you don't get the kind of return that you used to. Industries are changing. Years ago, when I first started, I worked for an international fund, and it was in the hotel and restaurant side. And I had 2 plans that went insolvent. One was the cafeteria workers, and one was the delicatessen workers in New York. Well, in New York, there was a delicatessen place you could go in and get your corned beef sandwich or whatever. There was one on every block. Guess what happened in the late 70s and early 80s? What's this McDonald's store? What's this Burger King? Okay? They wiped out the delicatessen. The cafeteria plant in New York had 1,200 employees. When I was a little kid, I went shopping with my mom. The only reason I went with her is we could go into Walgreens, and they had a cafeteria, and I could get my chocolate milk. You don't find those anymore. All of a sudden, the number of employees dropped to 400. Same thing that happened to the Teamsters. Now they had more. One last point, an interesting thing, it's not one of concern, but it is, we hit another milestone. A year ago last January, the number of retirees went over 10,000.
Wow. How many actives?
At that point, 8,300.
Okay.
Now, actives have been 11,000, okay, in the past, but then with the shortage of work, it dropped down to 8.
Okay.
So we're coming back up, okay? But that's the first time that the retirees, and I say retirees, that's certainly participants and beneficiaries. And every year on January, I do a analysis of retirees by age. I'm proud to say we have a retiree who's 104 and still receiving benefits. So when the average life expectancy is 83, boy, oh boy, are they taking us for a ride. But that's what these plans are all about. We fund. And it's not a participant, it's a beneficiary of a participant. But we did have a laborer who lived till 103. So yeah, you do have people that live past.
Wow. Are there any other questions for Mike? Great.
Is it possible to get from the plan the the retiree demographics stratum by age category as well as the actives and send that over to us?
Yeah, I could give you what the overall for the fund, or you want
So the
individual
composition of the 10,000 and the 8,300, right?
what the age grouping is?
The age stratums.
Give me just a second. Yeah, darn it, it's probably something that isn't put together here. Oops. Let's see if I certainly will.
If you don't have it today, that's fine. If you just
Yeah.
send it to Lori, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I don't have the current one. But just an example, here is what I will send, and it's been updated for 2017. That shows you the grouping by age.
Perfect.
So I will get that out because I know I just did that for January of 2017. So I will email you that tomorrow.
Thank you, and then I'll include it in the materials for the webinar participants as well.
And if there's anything, going forward that you think of, if you let, Lori know, certainly I can get her a copy. I do an annual administration report because I'm big on statistics, and because I believe that, trends dictate what a plan has to do. So most of the time somebody will call me and say, could you do a report of, and I say, of course I can. They pull it out of here and say, there you go. How'd you get that done so fast?
Speaking of which, if people do want to call you with questions, can you give us your phone number?
Absolutely. The number is 262-784-7880. I have a commitment to the participants. As long as I am fund director, we will never have an automated phone system. When you call that number, our receptionist will answer. She's supposed to answer within 3 rings, but sometimes that's a little difficult if she's tied up. And just tell her you want to talk to Mike, and I'm the only Mike in the office.
Very good.
And also for those people that are in Madison or out of the 262 area, there is a toll-free number, and that is 800-433-8570.
Great. And one piece of information that I believe you can get by calling the fund office is an estimate of your withdrawal liability. Is that correct, Mike?
Yes, what you would do is you ask for the financial manager, Charlie Baranowski. We will give you a verbal estimate for nothing. We're going to charge you $100 if you want it in writing.
That's a useful piece of information to have.
It is.
Great. Any other questions from the audience? Wonderful. Well, I want to thank our guest again, Mike Gantert, the director of the Milwaukee Building Trades United Pension Trust Fund. Thanks for taking the time to educate us, and thanks again for your willingness to answer our questions and be available.
My pleasure, and if there are any questions after, once again, just let Lori know or contact me directly, and I will certainly answer them. You have every right to know, because you do contribute into the plan. We appreciate that.
Right. Thank you.
Great. And I want to thank everyone who attended live and via the webinar as well. So I'm going to sign off now. Thanks, everybody. Take care.